If you've ever lived so poor that the silence from a heater shutting off could startle you, you'd understand how Renee Hall felt at 16 in Dayton, Ohio. It was a place where winter came earlier than the calendar promised, and the low rooftop seemed to bow under the weight of the cold wind. There, every penny carried the scent of tears and manual labor. Renee lived with her mother in a small apartment with cracked walls and floors that groaned with every step. Her mother worked 3 jobs: mornings at a laundromat, afternoons at a diner, and nights cleaning at a school. Even so, money was never enough. The bills stacked up like they were mocking her, and sometimes the fridge held nothing but a bottle of water and half an empty box of pancake mix. She learned to count money before she dared to dream. While her classmates talked about post-graduation trips, Renee was hunched over a notebook, drawing lines and numbers. On the left, extra work pay. On the right, electricity, water, gas, bus fare. Whatever was left, if anything, she labeled hope. Every evening after school, she worked at a textile factory on the south side of town, where the air was thick with fabric, dust, machine oil, and sweat. The industrial sewing machines roared endlessly, swallowing both day and night. Most women there were older, their hands all the same, calloused, cracked, covered in white lint. After a few months, Renee's hands looked like theirs, but her eyes still held something: resolve. She worked 2 shifts, 8 hours each. She slept about 4 hours a day, on a thin mattress that sagged in the middle like a hammock of old dreams. She didn't have much time to think about youth, because hers was measured in labor hours. Sometimes, she stopped by the library on her way home, a place of soft yellow light and the gentle rustle of pages. She borrowed books on accounting and finance, studying each difficult line under a free desk lamp in the corner. Accounting for small business, she read aloud, carefully pronouncing each word, as if every syllable were a brick in the house she was building for her future. Renee loved numbers. To her, numbers never lied. They didn't pretend, didn't deceive, didn't make empty promises. They were right or wrong, and if you were disciplined enough, you could make them work in your favor. There were nights when the power went out and the whole building sank into darkness. Her mother was used to sleeping early, but Renee would sit by the window, using the glow from a street lamp outside. She'd put her notebook on her knees, clutch a dull pencil, and write her plans. "I'll save 30% each month," she told herself. "No banks. I need to see my money." And so, in the corner of the old cupboard, she kept a metal coffee tin, her secret vault. Every bill was folded neatly by denomination, as if she were storing pieces of her life. On weekends, she went to the supermarket to look at prices. She bought nothing. She only wanted to know how many hours of work each item cost. A bottle of milk, a bag of rice, a bar of chocolate. Everything in Renee's life had a concrete value. A pair of shoes, 6 hours of work. Electricity bill, 18 hours. Bus fare, 1.5. There was no room for vagueness, no space for dreams. Sometimes her classmates invited her out. "Come watch a movie, Renee. There's a new one out." She smiled, declined. "I'm saving for the future." They laughed, thinking she was joking. But Renee never joked. At 21, her mother fell ill from exhaustion. Renee took on extra shifts to pay hospital bills, and through her fatigue, she whispered to herself, "I won't live like this forever." When her mother died, Renee didn't cry in public. She stood alone in the hospital corridor, fists clenched until her knuckles turned white. Then she whispered, "I won't let my mother's life repeat in mine." From that moment, Renee changed. She stopped merely surviving. She began building. She earned an accounting certificate and landed a job at a small firm on the outskirts of Seattle. She still took the bus and ate cheap sandwiches, but in her mind, a new map had begun to form, a map of ownership. Her co-workers called her greedy. Renee only smiled. "No, I'm just afraid of hunger." She feared the emptiness in her stomach, the cold nights without heat, the sound of an envelope hitting the doorstep, another bill, another threat. So when her first savings finally grew large enough, she didn't spend it on clothes or travel. She bought a house. It stood on the edge of Seattle, a neighborhood nobody paid attention to. The paint was peeling, The door creaked, and the yard was overgrown. But as Renee purchased papers before it, her heart pounded like hearing something sacred. The agent asked, "Are you sure? This house is old." She nodded. "I'm not buying beauty. I'm buying freedom." She brought her old coffee tin full of cash to the lawyer's office. When she poured it out, the worn bills fell onto the table with a soft sound to her. It was the sound of triumph. The lawyer, a gray-haired man, looked up in surprise. "You're not taking a loan?" "I won't borrow debt to buy freedom," she said. He went silent, then smiled, a hint of respect in his eyes. 3 hours later, the papers were signed. She carefully wrote her name, Renee Hall, on every page, as if each letter carried a piece of her soul. When they handed her the keys, she held them tight, the cold metal biting her palm. Not from fear, from feeling. She had clenched that same hand through hunger, night shifts, and counting coins. Now it held victory. That afternoon, she drove to her new home, opened the door, didn't turn on the light, and stepped barefoot onto the old wooden floor. No table, no chair, no bed. Just her, and the sound of her own breathing echoing through the walls. Renee walked through each room, running her fingers along the walls as if greeting them. "We'll be okay," she whispered. "I'll fix everything." She spread a thin blanket in the middle of the living room, lay down, and stared at the stained ceiling. The wind seeped through the cracks. Icy cold, yet she felt warm. For the first time in her life, Renee slept in something that was hers. The next morning, she made instant coffee, sat by the window, and watched sunlight spill across the chipped paint. In her notebook, she wrote the first line of her new life. "I'm no longer afraid of being poor. I'm only afraid of forgetting the feeling of someone who built herself." Time passed, and the house slowly changed. The walls were painted, the lawn trimmed, and small things appeared: a wooden table, a second-hand chair, and an empty picture frame. She paid for everything in cash. Each item was a small victory, and each small victory made her believe she was strong enough to stand against the world. She came home late every night, turned on the kitchen light, and counted her money again. Not because she had to, but because it reminded her, "I once had nothing." Sometimes, in the stillness of her house, she wondered, "Will anyone ever understand the joy I feel?" The answer was no, until Wade Blackwell walked into her life. Autumn in Seattle had a special kind of light, soft, honey-thin gold pouring through rows of fiery red maple trees. On afternoons like that, Renee often sat by the window of her little house, holding a cheap cup of coffee, listening to the rain tapping on the tin roof, and feeling a peace only those who've lost everything could truly understand. Her small house looked nothing like the day she bought it. The walls were painted cream, white curtains framed the windows, and a few small cactus pots brightened the kitchen corner. Everything remained tidy but straightforward, graceful just like her. Renee still lived alone, and truthfully, she didn't feel lonely. After all those years, she had grown used to the quiet. She was used to hearing the washing machine instead of voices, eating dinner alone, and turning on the radio to have someone speaking in the room. She believed she was strong enough not to need anyone beside her. Until that afternoon, she stepped into a small café on the corner of 5th Avenue, only to escape a sudden Seattle rain. The place was crowded, with dark wooden furniture glowing under soft yellow light. Renee chose a quiet corner, opened her laptop, and returned to finishing a report. She didn't notice the man at the table opposite her, watching since she came in. He wore a pale blue shirt, the collar slightly open, a cup of espresso in hand. His eyes were sharp but not cold, the kind of gaze that observed more than pursued. When Renee looked up at the sound of laughter from another table, their eyes met by chance. He smiled. She nodded politely, then went back to work. A few minutes later, he stood and walked over with his coffee. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low and easy. "I've been sitting over there watching you work non-stop. The coffee here's strong. You should drink some water, or it'll hit you hard." Renee was surprised, but not uneasy. His tone was not flirtatious, just that effortless, natural American courtesy. "Thank you," she said, and smiled slightly. "I'm Wade Blackwell." "Renee," she replied, brief and calm. He nodded and sat at the following table instead of returning to his own. Nothing pushy, nothing forced, just two strangers waiting out the rain. But something in his presence shifted the air. He told small stories about work, Seattle's endless dampness, and how people here drank coffee like water. He didn't pry, only invited. And every time she spoke, he listened, truly listened. What felt strangest was how Wade made her feel heard. She'd been used to doing, carrying, and enduring her whole life. No one had ever stopped, looked her in the eye, and asked, "Are you tired?" When the rain eased, they left. He walked ahead, held the door open, and said softly, "If it rains again, maybe we'll meet." The words were light, fleeting, yet Renee couldn't stop replaying them that night. Not because he was handsome, but because her heart felt still for the first time. The following week, they met again by pure chance at a neighborhood community meeting. Renee had only planned to sit quietly and leave early, but she stayed longer, wearing a brown jacket and that easy smile when Wade walked in. He spoke with charm and clarity, educated but humble. He talked about cleaning the lake, planting trees, and making the neighborhood worth living in. His voice was warm, his eyes knew how to find people, making anyone he looked at feel seen. After the meeting, he approached her, half joking, half sincere. "See? I was right. Another rainy day meeting." She laughed, a rare, unguarded laugh. "Yes, seems you were. So next time, let's not wait for rain. Coffee?" Renee hesitated for a moment. For years, she'd built walls around herself strong as concrete. But his eyes, his voice, the way he didn't rush or insist, made her feel safe. "All right," she said softly. Their first date was at the same café. Light rain streaked the windows, and jazz murmured in the background. Wade asked about her job, her family, and her little house. She told him things fewer than most would, but more than she'd ever told anyone. She spoke of a poor childhood, blackout nights, the old coffee tin where she saved her wages, and the day she bought her first home. He didn't laugh. He didn't pity. He just said, "You did something most people spend a lifetime dreaming about but never do." A simple sentence, yet it struck deep at a place inside her no one had ever touched. She looked at him, saw the golden reflection of light in his eyes, and in that moment, believed maybe this was the one person she no longer needed to guard against. They began seeing each other more often. On weekends, he helped her paint walls and fix windows. They cooked simple meals at night: pasta, fried eggs, and salad. Renee had never seen her home feel so warm. Sometimes she watched him sitting in the chair, reading with a quiet smile, and thought, maybe happiness is this simple. She'd never believed she could love, but love came like Seattle rain, quiet, steady, persistent. One night, standing together on the porch, watching the rain fall, Wade took her hand and said, "You know, this house feels alive." "Why do you say that?" "Because when I walk in, I feel peace." "You gave it light, Renee." She didn't answer, only tightened her hand around his. And then, in the hush of rain, their first kiss came slow, tender, as if time held its breath. That night, she slept in his arms, listening to the rhythm of his heartbeat blending with the rain, and thought, maybe, finally, I am loved. That winter, Seattle was colder than usual, but inside the little house, the light stayed warm, the scent of coffee mingling with soft morning music. Wade began visiting more often. His clothes hung beside hers. His toothbrush rested in a ceramic cup by the sink. Renee found happiness in small things, waking up to see him reading the paper, hearing him hum in the kitchen when she came home. 2 plates on the table, 2 voices in the house. She'd never imagined sharing her life, but now that she did, it felt complete. When her company won a big contract, Wade was the first to hold her and say, "You deserve this. I always believed in you." Then he poured wine, raised his glass. "To you and to everything you're building." She smiled, pride glowing quietly within her. Months later, they went for a picnic by Lake Union. He brought his camera and took her picture beneath the vast blue sky. In the photo, she's smiling, hair lifted by the wind, and he's standing behind her, his gaze warm enough to shelter the world. As the sun set that evening, Wade suddenly knelt and pulled a small ring from his pocket. "Renee Hall," he said, "I don't have much, but I have an honest heart. Will you marry me?" She stared, surprised, then laughed, trembling with joy. "Are you sure?" "I'm surer of this than anything in my life." She nodded. No flowers, no witnesses, just the sunset, the water, and the two of them. Their wedding took place weeks later, in the same house Renee had bought years ago with her coffee tin savings. She wore a simple white dress, he a grey suit. A few close friends and co-workers came to celebrate. Everyone said, "You two are perfect together." Renee believed it. She believed because no one had ever made her laugh so freely, because no one had ever listened so patiently, and most of all, because she wanted to believe. They sat on the living room floor on their wedding night, with cheap wine and candlelight flickering against the walls. Wade held her hand and said softly, "I don't need much. I need you." She leaned on his shoulder, feeling small, safe, and grateful. Every lonely year, calloused hand, and sleepless night seemed to lead to this moment. Renee Hall, the woman who once trusted only numbers, finally believed in something immeasurable: love. The days that followed flowed like gentle music. The house was no longer silent. There was laughter, the smell of cooking, and the radio in the morning. Wade called her by a tender name, Sunshine. Whenever she was tired, he knew how to ease her heart. She overlooked that something else was quietly growing beneath that soft light, slow, patient, unseen. But at that time, Renee didn't want to doubt. She only wanted to believe that, at last, the light belonged to her. And so their story began, a simple, beautiful love, as warm and brief as Seattle sunlight, always with rain waiting just behind it. The first months of their marriage felt like a Seattle spring morning sunlight, breaking through chill mist, warmth edged with rain. Renee Hall had never imagined she could be so happy. Every day, when she opened her eyes and saw Wade reading by the window, the light falling across his shoulders, she thought, "My life has finally settled into peace." He was a man of small, thoughtful gestures. Each morning, he brewed coffee and left her a note: "Have a good day, Sunshine." When she came home late, he reheated dinner and turned on the porch light. They watched movies, cooked, and took evening walks around the lake. Their life was simple, steady, and filled with trust. Until one day, Wade said, "I think we should combine our bank accounts." Renee looked up from her laptop, surprised. "Combine them? For what?" He smiled lightly, as if it were obvious. "You know we're married now. My money is yours, and yours is mine." She went quiet. Not because she was stingy, but because it stirred something profound, the instinct of someone who once survived by counting every coin. She had spent half her life building independence, and now the thought of merging everything left her off balance. "I'm just used to managing independently," she said softly. Wade didn't get angry. He only shrugged. "I understand. I think things are easier when we're in it together." He said it gently, but that night, Renee couldn't sleep. She didn't want to hurt him. She knew he loved her, or she believed he did. A few weeks later, she suggested opening a small joint account for household expenses, a gesture of trust. He smiled and hugged her. "I knew you'd see I only want what's best for us." She didn't realize it then, but that was the first brick in the wall Wade was quietly building between them. After that, little changes began. Wade started asking more questions. "Where are you going? What did you do with your bonus? Did you tell anyone about our investments?" At first, those sounded like caring questions, but slowly they turned into surveillance. Renee began to feel tired, as if every choice required permission. If she said she wanted a new washing machine, Wade frowned. "The old one still works. Why waste money?" If she accepted a new project at work, he'd say, "You're working too much. You never have time for me." From small things, Wade began to inhabit every corner of her life. He allowed her outright, making her feel guilty whenever she lived for herself. She started choosing words carefully. She avoided talking about her success, because whenever she did well, something dark flickered in his eyes, a shadow she couldn't name. One night, she came home late from a meeting. Wade was in the living room, lights off, the TV glow flickering across his face. "Where were you?" His voice was low, steady, but it chilled her. I told you, month-end meeting. Unter 10 at night? She set down her bag, trying to stay calm. Wade, don't do this. You're talking like I've done something wrong. He chuckled, poured himself a drink. I'm just asking. You're too sensitive, Sunshine. She fell silent. He still called her Sunshine, but the word had turned cold, almost mocking. As she turned away, he added, remember, this house would be 4 empty walls without me. The words froze her, not because they were true, but because they hurt. She had built this life from nothing, yet somehow he made her doubt her own strength. That night, lying beside him, she felt lonelier than in all her years alone. The house still glowed with warm light, but inside her, something had dimmed. After that night, Wade changed, not in explosions, but in precision, a quiet, calculated control. His tone stayed soft, his smile gentle, but command was lived beneath it. He began to suggest everything: how she dressed, spoke, and even laughed. You laugh too loudly. It's not professional. You should wear lighter colors more fitting for a businessman's wife. Renee tried to be patient. She didn't want to argue, didn't want to hurt anyone. She thought it was just a man's way of caring. But day by day, she felt herself fading. On weekends, when friends invited her out, Wade said, "You need rest. Stay home with me." He'd look wounded if she refused, as though she'd betrayed him. Once, a co-worker invited both of them to dinner. In the middle of the meal, while Renee was telling a funny story, Wade cut in with a stiff laugh. "My wife's amazing, just a bit long-winded when she talks." Everyone chuckled politely. Renee smiled too, but her eyes burned. On the way home, she asked quietly, "Why did you say that?" Wade answered without looking at her, "It was a joke. You need to lighten up, Sunshine." The streetlight swept across his face, and in that moment she realized, the man who once made her feel heard now made her silent. She began to lose sleep. She'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, remembering the years she'd fought for freedom. And now, with a house, a husband, and supposed stability, she felt caged. One evening, she was reviewing bills when Wade walked in. "What are you doing?" "Just going over expenses." "You don't trust me?" The question made no sense, but it stopped her breath. I'm just checking. I told you, everything's ours now. Why do you keep things separate?" He stepped closer, voice dropping. "Do you know how much it hurts me when you don't trust me?" That word hurt made her feel guilty, so she apologized, like always. And he smiled, hugged her, whispered, "I just want what's best for you." That night, she let him take the ledger. He flipped through the pages, nodded, then closed it. "Good. From now on, I'll handle it for both of us." Renee no longer knew exactly where her money was for the first time in years. From then on, things slipped further. He began checking her phone, reading messages, and scheduling her time. If she resisted, he'd say, "You're too stressed. I'm only trying to help." He turned control into care, and worse. She began to believe it. She drew inward, avoided arguments, did everything to keep the peace. But inside, she knew she was vanishing inside the very home she bought to be free. One night, she sat on the porch steps, watching the rain, and remembered her mother's words, "Never let anyone decide your worth." Tears blurred her vision, mixed with the rain. She whispered, "Mama, where did I go wrong?" The door opened. Wade stepped out and draped a coat over her shoulders. "Come in, you'll catch a cold." She said nothing. He sat beside her, voice gentle. "You know I love you, right?" Renee nodded, but inside, another voice spoke. "Yes, but you love controlling me, too." She didn't dare say it aloud. She only watched the rain and saw their reflections merge in the glass door, one bright, one dark. And she understood, the most terrifying thing isn't living with an evil man, but living with someone you love while he slowly makes you disappear. In that moment, as the pale yellow light fell across their faces, Renee knew winter had truly arrived. Sometimes, betrayal doesn't arrive like a storm. It seeps in quietly, a steady drizzle that dampens the walls, until one day you realize your whole house is soaked through. Renee Hall had felt it for a long time, but she kept believing that if she just loved enough, things would change. She couldn't say when exactly Wade began to change. Maybe it was the day he decided to work from home to be closer to his wife, he said. Maybe it was when he started making financial decisions alone, reassuring her, "You don't need to worry about the little things." Or it began the moment he started feeling small beside her success. Renee never bragged, but her work spoke for her. She'd been promoted, given a raise, featured in the company newsletter under the headline, "The Woman Who Can Do Everything." That evening, she brought the article home, smiling. "Look," she said, "isn't it great?" Wade glanced at it and smirked. "Everything, huh? Guess they think you're perfect." Renee froze. His tone didn't sound like pride. I'm kidding," he interrupted, setting the paper down. "But sometimes I wonder if you love your job more than you love me." The words were soft, but they pierced deep. She forced a smile. "Don't say that. I want us to have a better life." "And what does better mean?" he asked. "How much money is enough?" "I don't know. I want to feel secure." "Do I not make you feel secure?" Renee saw something cold in his eyes for the first time, not anger, but wounded pride. From then on, silence began to grow in their home. He spoke less, smiled less. But when he did say, every word weighed heavily enough to crush the air around her. One Friday night, Seattle was drowning in rain. Renee came home soaked, coat dripping, hair plastered to her forehead. The house felt different. The living room lights were off. Only the kitchen glowed faintly. Wade sat in a white shirt, holding a glass of wine, his face rigid as judgment. "Sit down," he said. She hesitated. "What's going on?" He said nothing and slid a thick stack of papers across the table, white printed pages. "What's this?" Her voice barely a whisper. "Divorce papers. And the deed transfer." She went still. Even the sound of rain outside seemed to stop. "What did you say?" He leaned back, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I'm done. Sign them." Renee stared at him. She couldn't understand, or maybe she didn't want to. "Done? Why?" "Because I'm tired," he said. "Because I feel like a stranger in my own house." "My house?" she blurted out. Something sharp flickered in his eyes. "Oh, right, your house. I've heard that one enough. You think you're better than me because you bought it?" "Wade, what are you talking about?" "I'm saying you forgot who the man of this house is." His voice rose, hands tapping the table, eyes burning red. "I won't live in your shadow anymore." Renee felt her heart go hollow, not from heartbreak, but from realization that her love had never been his equal ground. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "I want you to sign. Everything, the house, the assets, the accounts. Then you leave." "You can't be serious." "I am." He slid the papers closer. The pen beside them gleamed like it had been waiting. "Sign, or walk out of here." For a moment, Renee looked around the room. The walls she had painted herself. The cabinet she bought from a thrift shop. The wedding photo on the wall. Everything here bore her fingerprints, her sweat, her sleepless nights. She wanted to scream, to cry, to ask why. But no sound came. The man before her wasn't the one she loved, just someone wearing his face. Neither of them spoke. Only the clock ticked. Steady, as if counting to the end, Renee picked up the pen. Her hand didn't tremble, not because she was fearless, but because she'd already lost everything once nothing scared her anymore. She signed, page 1, page 2, the last page. Then she set the pen down, folded the papers, and pushed them toward him. She pulled the ring of house keys from her pocket, the same ones she'd carried since the first day, and placed them on the wooden table. The soft clink of metal rang like a nail sealing a coffin. Wade raised his eyebrows. "Smart choice." She stood, looking at him long enough that he turned away. Renee spoke quietly, her voice low but unshakable. "You just locked yourself out of your own life, Wade." Then she turned and walked away. No more words. No tears. The door closed gently, but to Wade, it thundered like judgment. The rain didn't stop until morning. Seattle lay drenched and silent. Wade Blackwell sat alone in the empty house, half a bottle of wine beside him, eyes fixed on the papers bearing his wife's signature. He should have felt triumphant. He should have felt free. But instead, an unfamiliar emptiness spread through him as if he'd destroyed something sacred without realizing its worth. He remembered her smile, the way she nodded every morning, the sound of her voice calling his name over coffee. But another voice echoed louder. She thought she was better than you. She didn't need you. Wade told himself he'd only taken back what was fair. He was the man of this house. He deserved control. The next morning, he called his lawyer, Thornton Webb, who had drafted the papers. "It's done," Wade said hoarsely. "She signed everything." Silence on the other end. Then Thornton's measured tone. "She signed? For real? Of course. You think I'm joking?" "Wade, are you sure she didn't have a lawyer? She's just an accountant. She doesn't know the law." "I see," Thornton murmured. "Then I don't know whether to congratulate or warn you." Wade laughed dryly and hung up. He poured another glass of wine, muttering, "It's all mine now." He didn't know that, across the city, attorney Patricia Vance, Renee's longtime friend, was reviewing the entire asset file and preparing the most critical phone call of Wade Blackwell's life. As for Renee, after leaving the house, she didn't go to a hotel. She drove to Green Lake, where they'd once taken their wedding photos. Rain drummed hard, the air sharp and cold. She turned off the engine, stared at the grey water, her mind empty. It wasn't a loss she felt. Not fear, just sorrow for the version of herself who once believed love could change everything. She thought of every moment his arms around her, his promises, the papers he'd placed before her. Then a faint, painful smile curved her lips. She picked up her phone and called Patricia. "I signed." "I know," Patricia's calm voice replied. "You did the right thing." "How long until?" "Just a few hours," Patricia said. "Then he'll learn he's the one who signed his own sentence." Renee closed her eyes and exhaled. "Good. I want this to be over." She sat there long, listening to the rain drum against the roof like a heartbeat slowing after a storm. Meanwhile, Wade opened another bottle, turned up the music, and wandered through the rooms like a conqueror. No trace of her perfume lingered, no half-finished coffee on the table, only emptiness. He brushed it aside. "It's fine," he said aloud. "This is my house. Mine." He texted a few friends. "It's done. Finally free." And he smiled, smug, hollow. But deep inside, something small began to crack. He didn't know that that crack would split wide open within hours, and everything he thought he owned would collapse. The next morning, Seattle was strangely clear. The night's rain had scrubbed the streets clean, leaving a cold, bright calm. In the house on Maple Street, Wade Blackwell woke with a rare lightness. He swung his legs out of bed, feet meeting the chill of the wooden floor, but inside, he felt warm, like a man freed from invisible chains. He looked around. The dresser Renee had always kept so tidy now stood empty, her pillow still dented from her head. No more faint trace of her perfume, no more of those small, quiet reminders that had made him feel lesser. At last, he murmured, "Freedom." He poured himself coffee, turned on jazz, and felt like a man who'd won his marriage, reclaimed his authority, proved that he was the one at the wheel of his life. Then his phone buzzed. The name flashed. Thornton Webb, attorney. "Morning, Thornton," Wade chirped. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Silence, only the sound of ragged breathing. "Thornton, you there?" "Wade. Jesus Christ, what the hell did you do?" The voice on the other end was shaking, frantic. Wade frowned. "What do you mean? What did I do? What did you sign last night?" "I didn't sign anything," Wade said, trying to stay calm. "She did. I gave her the papers, and she signed them. It's done." "You idiot." Thornton's voice exploded, so loud it drowned out the jazz. "Did you even read the documents?" "What clause? What are you talking about?" "The papers you handed her were part of an unapproved draft. The divorce hasn't been filed yet. The property transfer is invalid, and that house still belongs to her. Wade, every bit of it is legally hers." Wade froze. The cup in his hand tilted, coffee spilling onto the floor. "That's impossible. I reviewed the copies myself." "No, you didn't," Thornton roared. "The version you have was from before the marriage contract was finalized. The final terms were changed by her attorney, Patricia Vance." That name hit like a hammer to the skull. Wade stood motionless. I don't understand." "You forced her to sign, didn't you?" "Yes. So what?" "So under Washington law, coercion invalidates everything. Not only do you lose the property, but you could be charged with financial abuse. Wade's mouth fell open. He couldn't hear anything for a moment, only the pounding of his heartbeat and the sweat cold down his spine. Thornton, what did you say? I said, Wade, you just filed a lawsuit against yourself. The house went silent. The wall clock ticked steadily, each sound like a countdown to ruin. Thornton arrived an hour later, rain dripping from his coat, a folder clutched in his hand. Look, he said sharply, slapping the papers on the table. I checked everything. On the table were the very documents Wade had pushed toward Renee. Thornton pointed to the bottom corner of each page, a faint red stamp. These are invalid drafts. She knew that. She intentionally signed them to make you think you'd won. Wade gripped the chair. No, she's not that clever. Don't underestimate her. Thornton cut him off. Renee Hall is a senior accountant. She knows the law better than you know yourself. She worked with Patricia Vance before you even mentioned divorce. Wade sank into the chair, eyes wide and hollow. Suddenly, the memory of her calm face last night, how she placed the keys on the table, came flooding back. It hadn't been surrendered. It had been certain. She didn't argue, he whispered. Didn't even fight. She didn't need to, Thornton said quietly. You're the one holding all the debt now. Every business loan is under your name. Her accounts have been separate for months. Wade lowered his head to the table. His hands shook. The coffee cup toppled, dark liquid spreading like a stain. Thornton stood, voice cold as judgment. Wade, brace yourself. The court will contact you soon. Why? Because she filed a counterclaim. And trust me, there's no law left that can save you. He left, the door slamming behind him, leaving Wade amid a sea of papers, a man who just lost everything because he never understood the woman he'd underestimated most. Morning light streamed in, harsh and unforgiving. It revealed everything: pride, deceit, and the raw shape of fear growing inside him. Wade whispered, she planned it all, and for the first time in years, he felt afraid. Havlot. Across the city, in a small apartment overlooking Lake Union, Renee Hall sat by the window, a steaming cup of tea in hand. She wasn't happy, nor sad, just still. Her phone rang. Patricia Vance. Good morning, Renee, came Patricia's calm, professional tone. He knows. Renee smiled faintly. How did he take it? Nearly lost his mind. Thornton yelled at him. I doubt he'll sleep for days. Renee was quiet for a moment. Good, but I'm not suing. No, Patricia replied, and I wouldn't advise it. Let him live with what he's done. I just want peace. And you'll have it, Patricia said softly. He's bankrupt, disgraced, and alone. That's punishment enough. Renee nodded, exhaling. She didn't feel triumphant, just lighter, like a stone had finally rolled off her heart. That afternoon, she walked along the lake, the water rippling silver beneath the sky. Seattle felt strangely calm, nothing like the house she'd once shared with Wade. No more tension, no cautious footsteps, no words sharpened by control. She stopped by a wooden bench and pulled out the old notebook where she'd recorded every dollar she saved at 16. On the last page, she wrote, "The day I signed my name wasn't the day I lost. It was the day I began again." The wind turned the page, and sunlight brushed her hair. She closed her eyes, smiling. End of 40. Meanwhile, across town, Wade was unraveling. His phone buzzed. Non-stop banks, colleagues, friends. We need immediate payment, Mr. Blackwell. The joint account has been frozen. Your ex-wife has withdrawn from all shared investments. He shouted, hurling the phone to the floor. She can't do this. She can't. But it was already too late. The house was no longer his. His car was repossessed. Credit cards cancelled. His name was struck from every contract. By noon, when Thornton returned, Wade was slumped in the living room, head in his hands. I told you, Thornton said quietly, shaking his head. You misjudged that woman. Wade looked up, eyes red. She'll come back, won't she? Come back? Thornton gave a dry laugh. After what you did? No, Wade. She's gone, and she'll never look back. Thornton left. The door shut. Wind whistled through the cracks. Wade sat alone in the hollow house, and for the first time, saw clearly what remained: nothing but himself and the emptiness he'd made. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the glass towers, Renee's phone buzzed again. A single text. "You win. W." She read it, then deleted it. She smiled, faintly sad, but peaceful. "No one wins, Wade," she murmured. "There are only those who let go, and those who still haven't learned how." She folded her phone and walked toward the fading light. Behind her, Seattle began to glow, the city alight. A quiet reminder that brightness always returns once you've learned to leave the dark. In the days after Thornton Webb's phone call, Wade Blackwell moved through life like a sleepwalker. He couldn't tell if he was awake or dreaming, only that the world he'd once known was collapsing piece by piece, like a mirror cracking from its core. The house he once claimed as his victory now felt too vast, empty, and cold. No Renee's voice in the morning, no smell of coffee, no porch light left on for him at night, only the groan of wooden floors beneath his steps, like the house itself was sighing. On Tuesday morning, a loud knock at the door jolted him awake. A man in a black suit stood outside, holding a thick envelope. "Mr. Wade Blackwell?" "Yes, that's me." "Court summons," the man said, handing it over. The envelope read, "Notice of fine and temporary property seizure." Wade read it over and over, but the words blurred. Then his phone rang. "Thornton." "I warned you," came the lawyer's heavy voice. "The court just confirmed it. Everything in your possession is now under dispute. You can't sell, borrow, or move a dime." Wade sank into a chair, staring at the vacant room. Once, he thought he had it all: the house, the car, the prestige, the beautiful wife, the admiration. Now, after a week, all that remained was debt and disgrace. The papers began to report on it. A local headline read, "Businessman Wade Blackwell, accused of asset fraud, following divorce." He threw the paper to the floor and laughed bitterly. "Fraud? I just wanted back what was mine." But in his head, Renee's voice echoed, "You just locked yourself out of your own life, Wade." That evening, he went to their old bar, the one where he and his colleagues used to gather. As he walked in, a few glanced at him and looked away. The bartender, once friendly, leaned over and said softly, "You should go home, Wade. People are talking." He sat anyway, drinking alone. One glass, then another, then another. The music thudded, lights pulsed, but all he saw was his reflection in the glass. A hollow man, lost inside himself. Days later, the bank called. "Mr. Blackwell, your loan is due in 14 days. I don't have the cash. Your assets are frozen. We're sorry." He slammed the phone down and let out a dry, broken laugh. When everything began to crumble, Wade thought of his mother. She still lived in Texas, a strict woman who had once warned him, "Son, don't marry to prove something. Marry because she makes you better." He had never listened. "Now," he called her, "Mom, it's me, Wade. Good Lord, I haven't heard from you in months. Mom, everything's gone. I lost it all." Silence. Then her voice came, low and cold. "I've heard. You've shamed this family. Mom, I just wanted to take back what was mine." "What was yours?" she said sharply. "Son, that was never yours to begin with." The words cut deeper than anything else. He hung up, tears burning down his face. That night, Seattle stretched long and sleepless. He sat on the floor, surrounded by papers and spilled liquor. The TV flickered a short interview with Renee, in a segment about women recovering from financial abuse. She said, "I used to think losing everything was the end, but it wasn't. It was the start of understanding that true freedom is when you're no longer afraid of being taken from." Wade stared at the screen, the woman who once loved him now radiant, calm, untouchable. He turned the TV off, buried his face in his hands, and laughed a hollow, hopeless sound. "She won, but I'm the one who's truly lost." The next morning, light filtered through the blinds, glinting off the divorce papers on the floor, once his weapon, now his monument of stupidity. No one called, no one visited. Old friends had blocked his number. His consulting contract was terminated. The empire of Wade Blackwell fell in silence, no explosion, no blood, just the quiet of doors closing forever. 2. Across town, Renee Hall lived in a small apartment near downtown, full of sunlight and morning air. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. She woke early, brewed tea, and opened the cold breeze windows. No arguments, no fear, no hesitation before she spoke, only peace. She read, listened to music, and wrote plans for her future. Each day, she felt a little more alive. Sometimes, she thought of Wade, not with anger, but with understanding. Some people aren't wholly inadequate, just too weak to love without possessing. One afternoon, she passed the old building where they had once worked. The sun caught her reflection in the glass. A former co-worker spotted her and smiled. "Renee, I read your interview. Thank you, you've inspired so many women." Renee blinked, surprised, then smiled shyly. For the first time, she realized her story could help others. And in that moment, an idea sparked. A place for women to start again, a foundation for those trapped by financial abuse. That night, she opened her laptop and began to type, Renee Hall Foundation. Empower, educate, escape. 3 words that held her entire journey. Empower to give back strength. Educate to teach independence. Escape to help them break free. She worked through the night, not for money, but to turn pain into purpose. 290. Meanwhile, Wade sank deeper, his debts piled high. The house was seized, the car was towed away. He moved into a dingy apartment on the outskirts of town. One day, he caught his reflection in a cracked mirror, unshaven, hollow-eyed, shirt wrinkled. No trace of the successful man he once was, only a shadow of himself. He tried calling Renee once. The phone rang, then clicked off. No text, no answer. And strangely, for the first time, he wasn't angry. He knew he deserved it. A month later, headlines spread across the city. Renee Hall Foundation launches in Los Angeles, helping women reclaim financial freedom. Her photo filled the front page of the Seattle Voice. From losing everything to becoming a symbol of strength, the story of Renee Hall. Wade sat in a cheap diner, staring at the paper for a long time. Then he laughed, rough, cracked, but almost peaceful. "At least," he murmured, "she turned my pain into something good." He folded the paper, tucked it into his coat, and stepped outside. The Seattle sky hung gray and heavy, wind stinging his face. Maybe, he thought, this was the price life demanded, not in money, but in learning what it means to live without being trusted, loved, or admired. To press. That night, when all the legal papers for the foundation were approved, Renee sat by her window, the lights of Los Angeles shimmering in her eyes. She smiled, not a smile of victory, but of peace, because she finally understood. Sometimes, the most beautiful revenge is simply living well. Morning in Los Angeles had its own kind of sunlight, soft, golden, and light as breath. Renee Hall stood by the window of her small office, gazing at the flow of cars along Wilshire Boulevard. Below her, life pulsed on fast, loud, relentless, but inside, there was a rare, unshakable calm. No pain, no fear, no anger, only gratitude for still being here, standing. On her desk sat a simple plaque that read, Renee Hall Foundation, Rebuilding Women, Restoring Hope. The room held only a few wooden desks, folding chairs, and a whiteboard covered in notes, but to Renee, it was an empire. One built not from money, but from faith. Her friend and attorney, Patricia Vance, walked in with 2 young staff members. "The charter's signed," Patricia said with a smile. "The foundation's account is officially active." "Thank you, Patricia," Renee replied warmly. Patricia tilted her head. "Do you know what day it is today?" Renee looked out the window and said quietly, "It's the day I stopped living for anyone but myself." They both smiled. Nothing more needs to be said. That afternoon, Renee met with her new team of financial advisors. A young woman named Maria, curly-haired and shy, spoke softly. "My ex-husband controlled every account for 5 years. I'm scared of money now." Renee nodded, listening without interrupting. She knew that fear had lived it. Finally, she said gently, "Money isn't evil, Maria. It only becomes a weapon when the person holding it wants control. Learning to manage your own money is learning to keep your freedom." The room went still. Then Maria began to cry. Renee rose and hugged her, saying nothing, because some wounds only need to be seen to begin to heal. When the meeting ended, Renee sat alone for a while. Afternoon light spilled across her desk, touching the photograph of her parents. She whispered, "I survived, Mom, Dad, and now I'll help others do the same." Well, in the following weeks, word of the foundation spread faster than she'd imagined. Women from all over wrote letters and emails, sharing their stories. Some had been forced to sign debt agreements, some stripped of their homes, some lost faith in themselves. Renee read every line. Each story made her stronger. Each scar reflected a part of her own journey. She began writing a book, Keeping My Name, about her recovery from financial abuse. Not to boast, but to give others tools to rise. Every chapter reopened an old wound, cleaned it, and stitched it back with truth. When the manuscript was done, the publisher wrote back, "We believe this book will redefine what it means for women to be self-reliant." Renee smiled not for fame, but because her voice had finally found its purpose. At one conference, a student asked her, "Miss Hall, what made you so strong after everything?" Renee paused, then answered, "I'm not stronger than anyone. I just refused to fall where someone else wanted me to." The room erupted in applause. Some people cried, and at that moment, Renee Hall knew she was no longer a victim. She had become a guide, too. One weekend evening, Renee returned to Seattle for a city event called Women Shaping the Future. It had been 2 years since she left. Her old house now belonged to someone else, but she didn't return. She only drove by the street, parked a block away, and looked at the trees she had planted. They were taller now, greener like her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for teaching me how to stand again." When she stepped on stage, the hall applauded at the event. Media, business leaders, charities, everyone was there. The host introduced her. "Tonight, we welcome the woman who turned pain into purpose." Renee smiled and walked to the podium. Her voice was calm, deep, steady. "I was once a poor girl, working 16-hour days just to eat. I was once a wife belittled in the home I bought myself. I was once a woman signing divorce papers with shaking hands. But I didn't break. I stood up. And if I can, you can too." The applause came in waves, echoing through the hall. She looked down at the front row women her foundation had helped. They smiled, holding hands. She saw the light in their eyes, the light she once thought she had lost. After the event, a 12-year-old girl ran up and hugged her. "My mom says she didn't give up because of you." Renee knelt, smiling. "Then promise me something, sweetheart. You'll help someone else the same way when you grow up." "I promise," the girl said. As the child ran off, Renee felt warmth bloom in her chest. That was her most actual reward, not money, not recognition, but knowing the world was better because she hadn't given up. To 10. Back at her hotel that night, she stood on the balcony, looking over the city's glittering skyline. She thought about her long journey, from the girl who counted pennies, to the woman who lost everything, to the one who now builds new beginnings for others. She realized real strength wasn't about never falling. It was falling repeatedly and standing back up without turning your heart to stone. She poured a glass of wine, raised it slightly, and whispered, "To all the women who've been broken, but still choose to rise not for revenge, but for the right to live fully." End of re. The next morning, Renee boarded a flight back to Los Angeles. Sitting by the window, watching clouds drift by, she thought, "I went through everything just to come home to myself." As the plane burst through the clouds, sunlight streamed across her face, bright, bold, and unafraid. She smiled softly, not because she had defeated Wade, but because she had finally defeated her own fear. Time passes faster than we think, especially when there's nothing left to count. For Wade Blackwell, 10 years slipped by like a long, grey dream with no beginning or end. When he looked back, it all felt like mist. A house, a wife, a life that once seemed perfect. Then, he was gone, leaving him in a small Tacoma apartment with peeling paint and sunlight that he had only visited in the morning. The Wade at 48 was not the Wade at 38. Grey streaked his hair, his beard was uneven, his stomach soft, and the fire in his eyes had long gone out. He woke every morning at 6, brewed instant coffee, turned on the radio, and stared at the steam rising from a cracked porcelain mug. No company, no reputation, no one needed him. He worked part-time at a local auto shop. The younger mechanics called him Old Man Wade, half respect, half pity. They didn't know he once drove a BMW, drank expensive whiskey, or lived in a house with a warm porch light, waiting for him at night. One afternoon, while changing oil in an old Ford, a young worker asked, "Hey, old man, you used to be in business, right?" Wade smiled faintly. "Yeah, used to. So, why'd you quit?" He paused, watching the black line of oil drip steadily, then said, "Because I thought I was smarter than everyone else. And that's how I lost everything." The kid nodded quietly. Wade said nothing more. Some stories can't be told, only understood through silence. At night, he often went to the small bar near his apartment. No bright lights, no noise, just older men drinking quietly to the hum of a country guitar. Wade sat in the corner with a cheap beer, listening to songs about loss and second chances. Sometimes he thought of Renee, not the night she left, but the mornings she sat by the window, hair falling over her shoulders, sunlight soft on her brown eyes, that quiet, thoughtful gaze. He remembered her gentle smile, and how she nodded as he spoke about nothing. Now and then, he turned on his old phone and looked at the few photos still saved: their wedding day, a road trip, her laughing over a pan of eggs. The screen was dim and scratched, but it was enough to make his chest ache. "If only I'd known how to keep that," he whispered. No one answered, so he said it to the air. One night, he saw her name on TV. The anchor announced, "Renee Hall, founder of the Women's Financial Freedom Foundation, has received the Humanitarian Impact Award for her contributions to empowering women worldwide." Her face appeared on screen, still the same, but with a light in her eyes he'd never seen before. Not pain, not anger, just peace, the look of someone who had forgiven life. Wade sat frozen, not jealous, just stunned by the realization that she had moved on while he had stood still, far beyond him. He turned off the TV, poured another drink, and said softly, "Congratulations, Renee." Then he laughed, a small, almost tender laugh. It wasn't bitter. It was the sound of a man who finally understood that every life comes with its own price. Sometimes, Wade wrote in a worn notebook, no plans, no strategies, just confessions. "I did love her, but I didn't know how. I turned love into a war and lost the battle I started. Now, all I want is for her not to hate me anymore." He didn't know if Renee would ever read those words, but maybe they weren't meant for her. Maybe they were letters to the man he used to be, the one too proud to learn to be gentle. To Blinks. In the 10th autumn, Tacoma had its most prolonged rain in years. Wade stood under the garage awning, watching droplets hit the metal roof in slow rhythm. He thought of Seattle, the place where everything began and ended. He didn't know why, but he asked for half a day off that morning, got in his old truck, and drove north. Cold wind, wet asphalt, and the smell of damp leaves all felt like memory breathing again. He had no plan. He just wanted to see the place where his life once burned bright. When he reached Seattle, the rain had eased. The city looked the same, moss green, muted, endlessly gray. He parked on Maple Street, in front of the house that had once been his. It was white now, with a new fence and light glowing through the windows. Wade stood on the sidewalk for a long time. He didn't dare step closer. He saw a young woman carrying a baby across the living room through the glass. A new family. A new life. He smiled softly. "Good," he whispered. "The house has light again." Then he turned away. At noon, he stopped by the little café where he had first met Renee. It was still there, changed, but familiar. Kvita music, younger staff, strangers at every table. He ordered an espresso and sat at their old corner seat. "Sugar, sir?" the waitress asked. "No," he said. She liked it bitter. He smiled at the memory. His eyes glistened, but no tears fell, because in that small moment, he understood. Sometimes losing someone is the only way to learn how to love them properly. When he left the cafe, he walked along Lake Union as the sky turned violet. He sat on a wooden bench, pulled the old notebook from his coat, and wrote one last line. "If there's another life, I want to meet you once, not to love you again, but to say thank you." He closed the notebook and looked out at the water. The wind rose, carrying the smell of rain and dying leaves. A drop fell on his cheek. He looked up. The rain had started again. Wade didn't move. He let it soak his hair and shoulders, as if the sky was washing him clean. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry." No one heard. But somewhere, perhaps above the clouds where light breaks through, a woman might have smiled, as if she had. Oh, blow. By dusk, Wade turned his truck back toward Tacoma. The road shimmered with rain and streetlights. He turned on the radio. A country song hummed through the speakers. Sometimes, goodbye is a second chance. He smiled and sang along quietly, and for the first time in 10 years, Wade Blackwell felt at peace, not because he had been forgiven, but because, at last, he had learned how to forgive himself. Spring in Los Angeles had its strange kind of afternoons, not too warm, not too cool, just enough breeze to lift your hair and carry the scent of jasmine from the hillside streets. Renee Hall stepped out of the glass building that housed the Renee Hall Foundation, a coffee cup and a folder in hand. 12 years had passed since the day she signed the divorce papers. Now, at 48, she was slender, graceful, and steady, carrying that quiet confidence born of surviving everything you once thought would destroy you. Her days were full of board meetings and workshops, and women came to her for help, hope, and a way to begin again. Yet, somewhere deep inside, she sometimes wondered, had she ever truly closed the door on the past? That afternoon's meeting ended early. On a whim, she decided to walk instead of heading straight back to the office. The breeze felt like Seattle's cool, wistful, familiar. She drove toward a small neighborhood near the Santa Monica coast, lined with imported maple trees turning soft gold under the slanted sunday. Parking her car, she strolled along the quiet street. Everything around her felt foreign, yet strangely known, as if every step carried her across old versions of herself. She stopped in front of a café called Union Place. The name made her heart catch for a moment. She smiled to herself. It's likely a coincidence. Inside, the café was calm, a few older patrons reading newspapers, and a man sitting alone in the far corner, back turned, shoulders slightly hunched, hair streaked with gray. Renee didn't notice him at first. She opened her notebook and started jotting down ideas. Then she heard a voice, low, rough-edged, steady. "Thanks. A little more sugar, please." Her heart tightened. That voice, she would have known it anywhere. She looked up. The man turned toward the counter. Older, bearded, time-worn, but the eyes were the same. Those eyes that once made her believe she could be safe. She watched him for a long moment. Wade Blackwell. He hadn't seen her. Or maybe he didn't dare to believe she was really there. Renee stood and strolled toward him. "Hello, Wade." He turned. Their eyes met still, stunned, as if time held its breath. It took him a few seconds to find his voice. "Renee, my God, is it really you?" She smiled, calm and composed. "It's me." He rose awkwardly, not knowing what to do with his hands. I never thought I'd see you again." "Neither did I," she said softly. "But maybe the world's just small enough for two people who once loved each other to lose their way and still meet again." The late sun poured through the window, casting a golden halo around them. Neither spoke for a while. The silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful, accepting. He gestured to the seat across from him. She sat a day. They ordered 2 coffees, like strangers who shared a memory. "You look the same," Wade said, voice rough but kind, "except there's a different light in your eyes." Renee smiled. "And you look different. Older, calmer." He chuckled, a sound half regret, half relief. "I suppose I finally learned peace just a little too late." "No one learns it early, Wade," she said gently. She tilted her head. "How have you been?" "I'm all right," he said. All right in the way someone is after losing everything but realizing he's still alive. "I work at a garage in Tacoma. It's not much, but I don't owe anyone anymore." She nodded, warmth in her eyes. "That sounds like a new beginning." "Maybe it is. Then it's enough." Silence returned, easy, natural. Outside, the maple leaves trembled in the breeze. "I used to think," Wade said quietly, "that if I ever saw you again, I'd apologize. But now that I do, I don't know where to start." Renee rested her hand lightly on the table. "You don't need to, Wade. I forgave you a long time ago." His eyes glistened. "Really?" "Yes. If I hadn't, I couldn't have lived the life I have now." He bowed his head, A single tear dropped onto the back of his hand. "Thank you, Renee." She smiled gently. "Thank you for teaching me how to love myself. I don't deserve that. No one deserves hatred, Wade. Only those brave enough to face what they've done deserve peace." The sunlight turned honey gold. They sat quietly, saying nothing more. Sometimes, one peaceful meeting is all it takes to settle a lifetime of unfinished feelings. End of Croom. When they left the cafe, Wade offered to drive her back to her hotel. She hesitated briefly, then nodded. As they walked to his old car, the ocean breeze brushed through her hair. The sky glowed orange, waves breaking softly below the pier. He stopped in front of the hotel. She turned to him and smiled. "Thank you for the ride." "Thank you," he said, "for letting me see you again." She opened the door, then turned back. "Wade, yeah? Do you ever regret it?" He looked into her eyes, a long, steady look. "Finally," he said, "I don't regret loving you. I only regret not knowing how to keep that love." She nodded slowly. "That's an answer I can believe." She smiled one last time, soft as a sigh, then walked away. He watched until she disappeared behind the glass doors. Wade sat there in silence. Ahead, the sun sank into the sea, the light spreading red across the waves. He exhaled deeply, slow, steady, free. "She's still the light," he thought. "Just not mine anymore." But he didn't feel sad. He felt grateful for the chance to say what was true and to be heard without judgment. Widobling. That night, Renee stood by the hotel window, watching the ocean shimmer under the city lights. The wind carried the taste of salt, the faint sound of waves. She closed her eyes, hearing his voice echo, "I don't regret loving you." A small smile touched her lips, not of joy, but of peace. The circle of memory had closed, quiet, complete. On the desk lay an invitation to an upcoming humanitarian award ceremony. She glanced at it, then set it aside, because now she knew. Her most significant victory wasn't the recognition. It was the courage to forgive the one who once broke her heart. That night, she opened her journal and wrote, "Some reunions aren't meant to rekindle, they're meant to show how far we've healed. Thank you for coming back long enough for me to know my heart is at peace." She closed the book, turned off the lights, and opened the window. The night air swept through the room, scented with salt and jasmine. Outside, Los Angeles shimmered like a sky of fallen stars. And in that light, Renee Hall whispered to herself, "At last, I'm home in my own heart." 15 years had passed since Renee Hall left Seattle. Time had softened so many things, the hurt, the harsh words, the eyes that once wounded her more than she could bear. But there was one thing time could never erase: the way she rose again. Now, at 50, Renee lived in a small beige house perched on Laurel Canyon's hills above Los Angeles. Big windows opened toward the valley where morning light filtered through the trees, spilling warmth across the living room floor. Every morning she brewed tea, opened the windows, listened to birds, and smiled a quiet smile, touched with reflection, the kind that belongs to someone who has seen everything and finally stopped fighting it. On her table stood a framed photo of her mother beside an old black and white picture, a 16-year-old girl in a textile mill in Ohio, hands dusted with thread. Renee looked at it for a long time, then whispered, "Thank you for not giving up, little one." 2. That afternoon, she had a lecture at UCLA and was invited to speak on finance and emotional resilience. The auditorium was packed. No one whispered, no phones glowed. Everyone waited for the woman the media had dubbed the Phoenix Woman, who rose from ashes to build something luminous. Renee stepped onto the stage in a white suit, hair pulled back. The light caught the lines of her face, not hiding the years but honoring them, a beauty born of dignity and peace. Her voice carried calm and weight. "I used to think strength meant not letting anyone hurt me, but eventually I learned that real strength is letting someone hurt you and still refusing to lose your kindness." The room fell silent. A young woman stood and asked, her voice trembling, "Do you still believe in love, after everything?" Renee smiled, eyes bright like sunlight rippling on water. "Yes," she said softly, "but not the kind I once believed in. Not love that proves itself through possession, but the kind that makes you freer every day whether the person you love stays or goes." Applause thundered through the hall. Many wiped their eyes. At that moment, Renee felt every scar in her heart turn quietly into light. When the event ended, a young man approached her, clutching a copy of Keeping My Name. "Miss Hall," he said, voice shaking, "your book helped my mom leave a bad marriage. She's starting over now and smiling more." Renee signed the book and touched his hand gently. "Tell your mother," she said. "I'm proud of her." He nodded and left, and Renee stood there, eyes glistening not with pain, but with gratitude. Loaded and Falls. Renee drove along the Malibu coast a year later on a summer morning. Wind rushed through her hair, the air smelled of salt, and waves crashed white against stone. She came here often not to escape, but to remember, to honor the long road behind her and the people who had walked parts of it. She parked by the sand, slipped off her shoes, and walked barefoot where the tide met shore. The water curled around her ankles. The sunrise glowed deep red ahead. She closed her eyes and breathed in the sea air. For a moment, she saw Wade, his lined face, his quiet smile, the last words he ever said, "You don't regret loving you." She didn't know where he was now, maybe still in Tacoma, fixing cars, living quietly. She didn't need to know. Between them, every debt had been paid, every wound mended by forgiveness. She sat in the sand, watching gulls circle above, and wrote one word with her finger: freedom. The breeze swept it away, the sand smooth again. She smiled because that was the most authentic beauty of life. Pain fades, peace remains. Aluria. That evening, she returned home. On her desk lay documents for a new project, scholarships for girls from poor towns who wanted to study finance. She signed them, then looked out the window. Sunset spilled honey-colored light over the hills, bathing the room in gold. She turned on the lamp. The house glowed warm, alive, like a heart that had finally understood its own journey. Renee opened her notebook to finish the last chapter of her second memoir, The Light Within. She wrote, "I don't need anyone to forgive my past. I only need to know that I still kept my light, no matter how dark I've walked through. And that's how I love not someone else, but this life itself." She set down her pen, closed the notebook, and opened the window. Evening wind swept through, scattering a few loose pages. One fluttered to the floor, a yellowed scrap from long ago, with her own handwriting, "I'll count every penny before I dare to dream." Renee picked it up, smiling softly. "Now," she whispered, "I can dream without fearing hunger." That night, she sat on the porch under the moonlight. A small cat wandered up, curling by her feet. She stroked its fur and looked at the glittering city below the hill. Renee Hall closed her eyes, let the breeze brush her face, and said not to anyone, maybe only to herself, at last, "I'm home." A shooting star crossed the sky, and that light brief, bright, unbreakable,